So we have a somewhat surprise guest. So we've been talking about our amazing congressional delegation. Before I introduce Senator Leahy, I want to introduce another amazing senator from the great state of Vermont, Senator Bernie Sanders, who's going to talk about right now.
It's nice to be back. Let me begin by thanking all of you for doing what citizens should be doing in a democracy. And that is, you got involved in a very, very important issue, and that is the issue of people having the right to know what's in the food that they eat. You organized, you knocked on doors, you went to the legislature. And then the legislature did the right thing. They had hearings, they discussed the issue, and they passed unprecedented law in the United States. So the governor did the right thing. He supported what the people did, and he signed that legislation. That is what democracy is supposed to be about. And as a Vermonter, I am very proud that our state became the first state in the country to mandate labeling for food that contains GMO products. And I'm proud of the grassroots activism that led to that result. This legislation is important because people have a right to know what they eat and what their children eat. The more information we have, the better consumers we are. This is not, as you all know, a radical idea. It is what over 60 countries all over this world have done in passing GMO labeling legislation. And that is also why the states, not only of Vermont, we went first, but of Connecticut, Maine, and Alaska, have also passed legislation to mandate labeling of food that contains GMO products. Unfortunately, the major agribusiness and biotech corporations disagree. They do not believe that people should have a right to know what's in the food that they eat. And that is why they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars in lobbying and campaign contributions to overturn the GMO right to know legislation that Vermont and other states have passed, and also that many other states want to pass. This is a movement that is going throughout this country. The Grocery Manufacturers Association, which sued and lost in trying to stop Vermont's law, has 34 lobbyists working on this issue alone. They spent $8.5 million lobbying between 2015 and 2016, and of course they're spending more this year. Monsanto has already spent $2 million in 2016 lobbying Congress, just in 2016. The Environmental Working Group has calculated that food and biotech companies and trade associations have spent nearly $200 million to oppose state GMO labeling initiatives like Act 120. When combined with Washington lobbying expenditures that mention GMO labeling, the total amount spent by corporate interest is close to $400 million. So you know that what we have done here in Vermont is important, because when they're prepared to spend $400 million to stop what Vermont has done, you know how important it is. And their goal clearly is to deny states the right to go forward in this area. And what they want to do is to pass legislation that is useless and will have no value to consumers. And if we don't stop them, and stop them now, they will succeed in doing that. On Thursday evening, as Senator Leahy knows very well, because we worked hard on this issue on Thursday evening, with no hearings and really no debate, a corporate-backed bill offered by Senators Pat Roberts. Roberts is a Republican from Kansas, and Senator Debbie Stabenow, who is a Democrat from Michigan, was introduced onto the floor by Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. This legislation would create a confusing, misleading, and unenforceable national standard for labeling GMOs. Instead of a uniform labeling standard like Vermont's law, the language allows text, symbols, or an electronic code to be used. This is intentionally confusing to consumers, and the information may be entirely inaccessible if the consumer does not have access to the internet, or if the store you're in does not have decent broadband qualities. The compromise language also allows the U.S. Department of Agriculture to rule on what percentage of GMO material is present in a particular food before it gets labeled, in contrast to Vermont and European Union standards, both of which require products with more than 0.9% to be labeled. In addition, this bill contains huge loopholes in the labeling requirement, stating that there is no labeling requirement for GMO foods that could have occurred, quote, through conventional breeding or found in nature, end of quote. Essentially, if the genetic engineering done by a company could have occurred in nature, there is no requirement to label it, which would prevent GMO corn, beet sugar, and soy oils from being labeled. FDA has confirmed this loophole, stating that with this language in the bill, quote, many of the foods from genetically engineered sources will not be subject, end of quote, to labeling requirements. Perhaps most shockingly, and what exposes the partial nature of this legislation, this bill imposes no penalties whatsoever for violating the labeling requirement, making the legislation essentially meaningless. Thus, this is a weak bill full of loopholes without any requirement to comply. Now, I find it interesting that many of my Republican colleagues who tell us every single day how terrible the federal government is, how they want to get the federal government off the backs of the people, now are prepared to support legislation that denies every state in this country to go forward, that wants to rescind the excellent bill passed right here in the state of Vermont. And I find it very objectionable that too many Democrats are supporting this corporate initiative. What this is about is what we have fought in Vermont year after year after year. This is not only trying to undermine the ability of people to know what's in the food that they eat, it is undermining democracy. It is undermining the ability of people to get things done. Because if you do it, and you went through all kinds of loopholes to get it done in Vermont, other states the same, then the big money interests say, hey, we don't want to see that. We're going to overturn that. And then we wonder why so many people give up on the political process and why they don't come out to vote. All right, so what we have right in front of us right now, and I know that I speak for the entire delegation, is that we are going to do everything that we can in Vermont and around this country to rally the American people to stand up to Monsanto and the other big money interests and tell them that, yes, mothers and their kids have a right to know what's in the food they eat, and yes, when the people go forward and pass good legislation, we're not going to allow multi-billion-dollar corporations to rescind that legislation. Thank you all very much.